And welcome to Your Voice Matters. We had a great discussion yesterday with Katie Fahey, who is the founder of Voters Not Politicians, about Proposal 2. This is the redistricting proposal that presumably will get it out of the smoke-filled back rooms and put it back in the hands of the voters so that it is less partisan. Right now, the majority party basically gets to redraw the boundaries, and as a result, it looks like a 3-year-old has been attempting to do origami. It is a mess when you just look at some of those districts that have come out of this process. But there are critics that say that alone doesn't make it bad, and that this isn't necessarily, Prop 2 isn't necessarily the right remedy. And so we have invited on the other side, after hearing from Katie yesterday, Tony Daunt, who's executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund. Tony, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
And Tony is here to take your questions, as we always do on Your Voice Matters when we put together a segment like this. The number to call, 1-800-859-0WJR. 1-800-859-0957. And if you don't want to call it in, if you're on the road or if you're at home and you're trying to multitask, we welcome your emails. yourvoicematters@WJR.com. You can send in your question that way, or on Twitter, #WJR Your Voice. Let me start it off the way I did with Katie yesterday. Explain to me, are you promoting the gerrymandering and the redistricting that we're doing now? And what do you think about the system that we have in place?
Well, I certainly, I throughout this process, I have not been out defending the current system. Certainly, there are reasons that the lines look the way they do at times, related to the Voting Rights Act and the protection of the African American or majority minority vote districts, the A-poll standards that are related to how you draw districts here in the state of Michigan specifically. For state house and state senate, but that's not the issue before us. The issue before us is Proposal 2, and people will be voting on that on November 6th, and some are even voting now absentee, and we encourage them to vote no. And the reasons for that there are many of them, but the ones I focused on are the fact that this is costly. This is a blank check for the commission once it's in place, and once they have that blank check, they're accountable to nobody. There is no accountability built into this for people in the public, for taxpayers, for voters. They're accountable only to themselves. It is complex, 3,200 words long, fully one half of the length of the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And it's unfair. They've taken great strides to prohibit certain people from serving on this commission because they are civically engaged, people who serve on their local executive party committee, Republican or Democrat, people who run for township trustee. But oddly enough, there's nothing in there to prohibit convicted felons.
I would love to take each one of those criticisms and handle it separately, and we've got the time to do that today. In the meantime, we're awaiting your calls, 1-800-859-0957, 1-800-859-0WJR, if you've got a question for Tony Daunt, who is with the Michigan Freedom Fund, which is standing in opposition to Prop 2. You said something that I found interesting, that you're not endorsing the way it's done now. Do you think that the folks with Voters Not Politicians are overselling the benefits of this, and that they have the ability to change it dramatically? Because, as you said, a lot of the way that the boundaries are drawn is based upon the Voting Rights Act, and that's pretty restrictive.
Very, very restrictive, and I would emphatically think that the people who are supporting this, and in particular Voters Not Politicians, are overselling the benefits of this. If you look at other states, California is a state that this is based most closely on, and they had the same kind of gamesmanship and political parties trying to game the system and rig the system when they instituted this in 2010 and 11, and you simply can't take the politics out of a political process. And are there certain ways to do things better? I'm sure there may be, and I think we're willing to have that conversation, but Proposal 2 is not that solution for the reasons I've laid out. And I think once it's in the Constitution, it's virtually impossible to change, and that's a dangerous it's a dangerous experiment with our state constitution.
Steve Ball has called in. He sent a text, actually. Does gerrymandering make sense when separating urban and rural areas? If not, rural areas will not be represented because of the dense urban populations.
Well, the supporters, the proponents of Proposal 2, and many in the national media in particular, have done a good job of conflating to make the issue of redistricting be strictly about gerrymandering. And one could point to the fact that here in Michigan, when these lines were drawn, there were no lawsuits filed. It wasn't until the last, I think, 8 to 10 months that a lawsuit was filed. And I think that was a cynical attempt by Mark Brewer, former chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party, to help draw attention to this proposal and conflate the issues. Again, there may be different ways to do things, but this gentleman, if I'm understanding his question correctly, is correct. A lot of the reason we see lines look a little funkier, so to speak, when you get into the more dense population areas is there's more people, and you have to draw a line somewhere. So regardless of what proposal, the way you do this in place, you still got to draw a line. These things have to be divided by population, and at the federal level, they have to be zeroed out. They have to be no differential at all.
But there have been some contortions, and we'll have to get to that on the other side of this break. I mean, when you look at, I think, the 13th congressional district, where you've got it so far to the east, they can be 45, and I think Devin Skillian pointed this out in his roundtable with you. I mean, he can cross the street and be in a different district in Grosse Pointe, but still visit a member of the district that's 45 miles away. That's crazy town. That's Looney Tunes, and I want to get your reaction to that. But first, let's take a short break. Come back with more of Your Voice Matters with Tony Daunt, 1-800-859-0WJR, 1-800-859-0957. Your questions for the anti-Prop 2 opponents. And we invite you to call in right now at 1-800-859-0957 to speak with Tony Daunt. He is the executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund. And we were talking earlier about the redistricting and also the gerrymandering that we have seen going on. There's a sense, I think, among some Republicans, well, yeah, it's in the ball's in our court now, so we're just fine with that. We're not going to change that. And yet I want to point to the lawsuit that you referred to, where the former chief of staff of Congressman Thaddeus McCotter, one-time Congressman Thaddeus McCotter, emails from that aide, said that this was a way to contain, quote, Dem garbage to 4 congressional districts in southeast Michigan, that Republicans packed and cracked the legislative and congressional district maps. To say the least, he says, in a glorious way, that makes it easier to cram all of the Dem garbage in Wayne, Washtenaw, Oakland, and Macomb counties into only 4 districts. It shows how cynical and how political this process has become. Now, some folks may be okay with that, if not through this ballot referendum. How will it ever change when the party in power is so obviously delighting in it?
Yeah, so both. Unfortunately, both parties throughout this country will utilize the political system to their benefit.
It's leverage,
what we have before us is a proposal that may sound good on its face and may make some good points, but ultimately, for the reasons laid out, the costliness, the unaccountability, it's going to exchange one set of problems with another. And
but is that the way it's written, or because it would be enshrined in the Constitution?
I think that's both. That's twofold. It is poorly written because as related to the cost, they took great strides to put a minimum, to put a floor in there. There's nothing.
But the legislature can put in a ceiling.
They cannot.
There's going to be enabling legislation for this.
They have been very specific. The supporters of this have been very specific that they took the legislature out of this so that the legislature can't monkey around with it. So they
can't defund it, but they can put in a ceiling.
That's what they want you to believe. But when you look at the language, and I've done that numerous times, there is nothing in there that sets a ceiling, that sets a maximum. And they want to be able to claim that. But very clearly it says the legislature shall appropriate whatever this commission deems is necessary. And that's one of Justice Markman, who wrote a lengthy dissent related to this in the Michigan Supreme Court.
But the floor is a pretty high floor. It's 20% of the SOS budget, right?
25%, at least 25% of the SOS budget, 25% of the governor's salary.
So don't we have the ability then, if we don't like the way that money is being spent, to change the Constitution, to get them the heck out of there?
That's an awfully big hurdle to jump to fix something that has already been pointed out as a mistake.
Let's go to Juan in Belleville, because I think he's going to join in on this conversation about the Constitution. Juan, good afternoon, and welcome to Your Voice Matters. Thanks for calling in at 1-800-859-0957. 0957. Your question for Tony or your comment?
Well, I'll make a comment first. My mother was a very wise woman, and she always told me that you never change the Constitution. The Constitution is the framework by which you govern. The laws are done through the legislature. And I guess my question lies with, is the Constitution the appropriate place to make law? Which it sounds to me, this is a law that we're making. And as the previous caller was talking about, what do I want to say? Let's just leave it at that.
Let's take it from that one. Thank you very much for your call. But as we said, look, where is the initiative for anybody in control of the legislature to change or reform a system that is benefiting them, and some would argue benefiting them greatly?
I'll start. I point out, Juan, very, very smart to indicate the wiseness of your mother. Always a smart move when you have a microphone or the ability to be
Mom
on the radio. But that's a great point that he makes related to the Constitution. And Michigan voters over the years have been quite skeptical of putting things like this in the Constitution, things that are 3,200 words long, things that have established a blank check for the commission that's being created. And I think that the more they hear about this, the more likely they will be to be skeptical of this and to vote no. And that's my job. That's the point I'm making, that they need to be aware of this, because the other side's had a relatively free pass over the last 18 months to make their points, and we're coming in and making sure people know the truth.
Sure. And we should point out that the same argument is made about Proposal 1, that your ability to really fine-tune something becomes much more arduous when you have to reach a threshold of 75% approval in a legislature that can't agree on anything on some days. Let's take a short break, do a little traffic and weather. Back with more calls for Tony Daunt, 1-800-859-0957. And what the supporters of Proposal 2 say this is supposed to do is to really clear the clouds away from the smoke-filled rooms where the redistricting is done by party regulars, and to clear all that out, in their words, to drain that swamp. And they say that they have received support from the Sanders camp. They've received support from the Trump camp, that this is all part and parcel of the swamp, that they will gerrymander their way into taking away, to some degree, the power of your vote by allowing politicians to pick their voters rather than the other way around. This is not to be confused with Proposal 3, and I want to make that delineation there, because Proposal 3 is about enshrining straight-ticket voting, voting rights for veterans, same-day registration, and no excuse absentee voting, and enshrining that into the Constitution. That is a separate matter, and there's been a little bit of confusion on that. Let's get back to the phones. Curtis is calling in from Garden City. Curtis, you have a question for Tony Daunt.
Yeah, I just thought it's odd that we're worried that our elected officials can't do something honestly when they're dividing the boundaries, and so we're going to elect another board.
Well, wait a minute. Wait. Curtis, have you seen the boundaries, and what makes you think they're doing it honestly? The Democrats didn't do it honestly in 82, and, I mean, they haven't behaved honestly in a number of ways.
I understand that, but what would make us think that electing another group of people is going to not result in the same thing?
Okay. And that's a good question, and let me ask it differently for you, Tony, because when Katie was here yesterday, she said, look, there's the idea of accountability. Nobody is kicking out an elected official because he redistricted in the party's favor. So that's not going to happen. Under this, these people would be chosen like a jury, and those that would object to certain commission members would have the ability to disqualify them. Why is that not a good process?
Again, the way that Katie has portrayed it is certainly going to be more advantageous to their argument than what the reality is.
You think?
And the issue of accountability of how these people are chosen, the bottom line is, once they are on this commission, once these 13 people are on this commission, all of the complex Rube Goldberg mess that they go through to get there, they are then accountable to nobody. And the legislature, for all
they can be pulled out in 2 years. I mean, they're basically signing up for kind of a 2-year ride. After they withdraw the boundaries, they're replaced.
as I understand it, it's 13 people each decennial census and cycle, but that's a lot of time to do a lot of damage to the state of Michigan, and the ability to hold them accountable during this process, that's the important part.
Okay, let me go back to Curtis for a moment. Curtis, are you still on the line?
Yes.
Good. Question, you've heard Tony's answer, and I understand what you're saying because you're raising the accountability issue as well, but if not through this means, how else would we ever fix it?
I'm not saying that that going back to or just keeping what we have is the right thing to do, but
okay.
I don't see how this improves it.
Okay, very good, and I think Tony would. Tony gets a thumbs up. You get a thumbs up from Tony on that. Correct problem, wrong remedy.
Absolutely. I'm a conservative. I'm very skeptical of government and of politicians of all stripes. But this is the binary choice: yes or no on Proposal 2. Proposal 2 is dangerous. It is not the right solution.
If it's not the right solution, then why we have 6 states already adopted it, and a few more, in addition to Michigan, are considering it. And we'll explore that with Tony Daunt from the Michigan Freedom Fund, and also talking about the influence of external donations, millions and millions of dollars trying to change the Michigan Constitution, and what the hazards of that may bring. It's next. And we welcome back Tony Daunt, the Executive Director of the Michigan Freedom Fund, to our mic for Your Voice Matters, and we invite you to call in with your questions, 1-800-859-0WJR, 1-800-859-0957. Off Twitter, John is slamming me because I said 6 other states have done this, as if I was giving legitimacy to the idea. John, I wasn't. I am raising the question, though, which we're allowed to do here. He used the bridge analogy. If someone told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it? And so I will say to John, thanks, Mom. I got it. But here's the question. We do see 6 other states that have adopted this. We do see several others that are considering it. So it is something that other states have done because they felt it had reached the kind of proportions that it needed to be addressed. Do you see anything in the way that they've done it that you can point to where you would say maybe Prop 2 isn't the answer, but the way this state's doing it would be something worthy of consideration?
And I thank you for pointing out kind of in the end of the question there the fact that the states that have done this, they have different ways of going about it. This is based most closely off of California. And, a key problem with this one is the unaccountability. That takes the legislature completely out of that. There's no way to hold these people accountable as they're drawing the lines or once they're drawn.
And we should point out that the governor supported it because he had it up to his very carefully plucked eyebrows, that this was such a mess in California, and it did take the assembly out of it. And if I'm not mistaken, Republicans felt pretty good about the fact that they felt they had a stronger voice and that they gained some seats.
I can't comment on how the actual, the Republicans in California felt. I will point out, as they were doing this process in California, it was passed in 2008. They had their first go-around in 10 and 11. ProPublica, which is a national nonpartisan group, look at election laws and elections and things like that. They had a very lengthy, well-researched piece that pointed out the exact same problems arose where the Democrats in particular in California tried to game the system and rig the system in their favor for the redistricting through this commission. And that's...
Well, and they basically did it by flooding, and we should point out to Mr. Josephs, who emailed this into it. Mr. Joseph, thank you for that. And he pointed, by the way, if you want to find the article, it was in ProPublica, December 2011. Is Mr. Josephs a friend of yours?
I don't think so.
He's doing a great job helping you make your point. He said the Democrats flooded the Open Meetings Act with supposedly independent people, and because it was overwhelming that they automatically got them to lean the way they wanted the commission to lean. They flooded the zone, is what we would say in football or basketball.
Yeah, and again, that's just another reason to vote no on this. And you asked about other states. There is... Iowa, for instance, has a model that maybe would be worth discussing, where they have kind of the nonpartisan types in their legislative service bureau, which is the attorneys who write the bills. They come up with the lines, and then the legislature votes up or down on it. That still leaves the legislature involved. Still
so
leaves
almost
accountability.
But it's a hybrid then, isn't it?
Indeed. And it doesn't take this fully radical step of cutting the legislature out, of putting 13 unaccountable, randomly selected individuals in charge of this, who have the ability to pay themselves whatever they want, set their budget whatever they want.
So let's go back to the phones. Good point. DJ, calling in from Ann Arbor. Welcome to the show, sir. You have a question for Tony Daunt.
I do, Guy. Thank you very much. I guess first, just a point on California, since this is modeled after California. As I understand it, when California started, it was a $3 million budget for the proposition, and they're already up to $10 million. And most of that is being spent on the lawsuits that still come about because of the proposition. So you're not solving the problem of people suing to necessarily, get the way they want with redistricting.
DJ, so that's a great point. And by the way, Arizona had the same problem. So that's an excellent point. Do you have a question for Tony? And I thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, two questions. One is, if this is really a Michigan issue, why are we seeing so many outside of Michigan groups pouring, the millions of dollars into this? And I guess my second question is, if it's really voters, not politicians, why aren't we concerned about the county redistricting efforts, too, within county commissions that are drawing the same partisan lines to, stamp out one party or the other?
Okay. Good question, DJ. And by the way, we want to direct our listeners, and DJ, you'd enjoy it, too, the Michigan Campaign Finance Network, probably the best watchdog of this in the state of Michigan, a guy named Craig Mauger, puts out a wonderful newsletter. You can find it online. You can also find it in Bridge Magazine, bridgemi.com. $5.5 million came from the group that Politico refers to as a liberal secret money network. That's the 1630 Fund. Another $4.84 million came from Texas-based Action Now Initiative. The SEIU Union and also National Redistricting Action have kicked in money. But two donors putting in over $10 million, that's more than 90% of your opposition's budget.
Indeed it is. And, the Michigan Freedom Fund has been involved in paying attention to this very issue from the beginning, that despite the rhetoric that it's independent, it's nonpartisan, they don't have any political leanings, it's Michigan-based, we've been pointing out all along that follow the numbers, see who the people are that support this, and lo and behold, like he's $10.5 million from out of state. These people don't just open up their pocketbooks to the tune of $5.5 million if they don't think it's going to benefit their side one way or the other.
All right, we'll be back with more for Tony Daunt as our discussion continues on Your Voice Matters here on WJR 1-800-859-0957. And we had a listener call in advance of having Tony on to ask this question, which is, where do you guys get your money? We know there's a tremendous amount of external influence and donations that have poured in to voters, not politicians. Something Katie Fahey said, by the way, off mic, that she was quite proud of. And she said, that it shows that there is, and it's something that, as you would understand, you would never turn a donor away unless they were truly onerous. Your budget, since July, you've received $1.4 million of the Donors to Protect My Vote comes from the Michigan Freedom Fund. But how does the Michigan Freedom Fund get its donations? Well, who are you funded by?
That's a great question. We are organized as a 501c4 social welfare advocacy group through the IRS, and we follow the law as it's written, and believe very strongly in donor privacy. And we have donors large and small across the state who support our mission of less taxes, free markets, choice in all things related to the economy. And
can I ask you, because it doesn't divulge the character of your people, but and protects their identity, but of those that contribute to the Michigan Freedom Fund, how many of those dollars in the most current segment that we're looking at since July have come from outside the state of Michigan?
Gosh, I would have to look. We generally keep it close to our vest in terms of those dollars.
Have you seen a surge?
To protect that.
Have you seen a surge?
Of
external donations?
We our support is vastly and largely from within the state of Michigan, and people who live here, work here, raise their families here, and we are proud of that.
Okay. And I guess we can't FOIA it, and you don't have to file, do you?
We file all of the paperwork required by federal law in terms of donations and how we spend that money.
Right.
And both sides of the aisle, we believe strongly that people should be able to engage in the public debate without fear of retaliation or intimidation based on their ideas, and that's why we believe in protecting that donor privacy.
All right, Tony.
It was the hypocrisy from the other side that's really quite.
I understand, but we had that question from a listener even before we brought up the Mauger look at the disclosure form. So know that was somebody that just said, "Hey, I'm curious," especially when we see on Prop 1 and elsewhere just the flow of money from outside the state. Let's go to Mike in Lansing, who's got a question about this. A lot of folks concerned about, and justifiably so, bias. How can we make this truly independent? Mike, your question.
Yes, sir. Actually, my question is this. It's a two-part question. Because in this day and age, anybody can self-identify as anything. I can self-identify as nonpartisan, but a three-minute conversation with me would say that I might be being disingenuous by saying that. So, A, how do you identify nonpartisan people, and B, where do you find them for this committee?
Well, that's an excellent question, Mike. And the simple fact of the matter is we have to take people simply at their word, what they sign on their paperwork in terms of their application for this. And I think we all know people are not honest. And if you're looking to engage in a process like this, you probably have some leaning one way or the other. And it's difficult to take the politics out of this. And just taking people at their word for such an important role is, I think, reckless and not the right way to go about it.
But it's easy to background check folks. We know who is politically active. We know who have been precinct delegates or captains. We know who have been involved in the process, right? So isn't the vetting process actually going to be, especially on the county level? There will be disclosures. You folks on both sides will be vetting and outing the others.
Well, you make an excellent point, and one of the greatest ways we would have to know what people's leanings are and to be able to verify that is how have they served in a capacity before with their local elective, their local party? Are they a precinct delegate? Have they worked for candidates or campaigns? And guess what? All of those people are specifically prohibited, so we don't have that ability to go back and look.
Right, and we know that they've set aside so many seats for Republicans, so many for Democrats. It's those in the middle that are supposedly independent that are so critical to the process and to keeping it nonpartisan. That could be the problem, and there is a lot of justifiable skepticism about that. And in fact, it not only happens through the selection process, but in who you hire as consultants to manage your data. If you can take a data management company that leads one way, that can do the trick. We have to say goodbye to Tony. It's been great having you on. Thanks for being such a very clear-spoken advocate against Proposal 2, and we've heard both sides now, and hopefully we're prepared for Election Day.
Thank you very much for having me, and vote no on Proposal 2.
All right, very good. Tony Daunt from the Michigan Freedom Fund. When we come back, why it's going to cost you more to repair your car in the future.